to the Independent Musician. Our weekly podcast will focus on the independent artist and the music market at large. You'll hear from those artists as well as music execs, tech experts, and marketing leaders from around the globe. We'll discuss what it takes to make it in the biz and how you can overcome obstacles as you progress your craft, all the while making it interesting and fun. Now, here's your host, Mark Skoda.
Hey, this is Mark Skoda, the Independent Musician Podcast. We have with us today the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Intercept Music, Mr. Tod Turner. Tod, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate being here.
Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day, and it's been a joy knowing you over the past several years, and really I wanted to get you on one of the early episodes here so that we could actually talk about Intercept and about you and your background, because you've been doing some very interesting things with respect to automating the processes for A&R management and for artist management generally. And so as I was one of your early adopters, I said, gosh, I've got to have Mr. Turner here, and I'm grateful for your time today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of Intercept first, and then I'd like to hear a little bit about how you came to Intercept, because as I've discussed with you in the past, we both come from very different backgrounds to the music business.
Well, isn't that the truth, Mark? Well, let me tell you a little bit about Intercept first, and then I can give you the brief history of how we sort of got here. Intercept Music is in the music marketing and distribution business. We work with independent labels and independent artists to try to fill the gap between what they need to do to rise above the noise of 80 million songs at Spotify and 60,000 new ones a day, and actually get themselves heard out there. So our concept is basically to put everything in one sort of a bicycle wheel with the music at the center, and then we start adding spokes for distribution and different marketing channels, etc. And we're still adding spokes. So that's what we do.
And your technology really has been interesting, because I recall when you and I first met, it was several years ago now, in my son's band, which was then called the Next Door Boys. We both sort of hit it off personally, and they were nascent musicians and a nascent band, and I was grateful for you, frankly, helping them get some of their early music distributed. And it was fun because, honestly, Intercept at that point was really developing its framework, its technology framework, but you've come a heck of a long way beyond that, and I think where you are today and some of the things that you've been bringing on board to help artists, and more importantly, to help independent labels like Iron Gate begin to serve those artists in a programmatic way has been quite substantial. And I think the leadership that Intercept has taken for artists and labels, I think, differentiates the technology that you're bringing to bear. To be sure, a lot of people can go ahead and buy individual pieces and kludge it together, but you've really taken a more holistic approach and integrated it into a singular platform for the artist, haven't you?
We have, and although we have an artist-centric focus, and I appreciate you bringing up the concept of labels in particular. I mean, the artists are the ones creating the music, but the labels play a really critical role in the whole ecosystem, Mark, as undoubtedly you know now. The labels are the business portion of the equation, and they could manage all the business like a major label, or they could manage the marketing and distribution side and leave the decisions to the artist, as the independent labels or the Iron Gate model has. They play a really critical role because, I mean, I don't come from a music background, as you undoubtedly know. I'm a technology guy. I started in telecommunications, shared applications before there were things like screen sharing and stuff like that. I've always been involved in kind of consolidating different industries, whether it was in the electronic equipment or health industry, or whether it was in the equipment calibration industry. Music is a business of details, and artists, I have learned, are I can't remember if it's left brain or right brain, but they're the creative side for sure. And most artists don't have a lot of interest in the business side. And yet today, with the competition they have, there's just a demand for them to do something to rise above the noise, to get heard above. I mean, they're one grain of sand on a sea of 80 million. So they have to do something. And that's really what we're trying to provide.
Yeah, and you mentioned you came from a tech background generally. So while you've been in the music business a relatively short time, you understand the importance of technology generally and what I call the ability to do mass customization. One of the problems with the independent labels I've seen, and I've looked at many websites and doing the research myself, is the inability to programmatically deliver services over and over again to allow the creative side of the artist to essentially affect that creation, to affect that distribution, and to be out there, selling their music. You've basically taken an approach to say, look, we'll do things like automate the entire distribution process, help you manage in a lightweight framework your entire social media platform, integrate into your online selling, handling all of your merchandising and your streaming revenues and being able to pay you, the artist, as well as adding a whole series of marketing capability that an artist can buy on an a la carte basis, which is what I appreciated as both a technologist and as a label now, the ability to sort of roll your own as opposed to mandate a certain budget that many artists today simply can't afford. And in particular, coming out of the pandemic where nobody was making any money. So your model really on a programmatic and on a cost basis really makes a lot of sense for many, many artists, and in particular, the labels that serve those artists.
Well, thanks, Mark. We're finding it to be a pretty successful tool for both artists and labels to use. And yeah, you're right. What we've tried to do is put everything under one hood, so to speak, and let them pick. And there's a couple of other things that I think are really important. One is transparency, and this industry in general is not one that's really known for its transparency. You get a promise, and do you get a playlist or not? You don't really know. You don't have any way to check. And we think there's a better way. So we built 100% transparency into everything, all the way down to, as you get one stream from Zimbabwe and it pays 1/10,000th of a penny. It's in the detail that you get. So we've really tried to kind of use that as a foundation of what we've done. And then the other component to it is, if you're an artist, nowadays you're probably releasing music every 60 or 90 days. I mean, you just have to do that to stay relevant now. And if it's an album, you might be releasing it as a series of singles just to be able to do that. Well, you need every artist and every label needs to know that the service that they're going to is trusted. And we go way out of our way to make sure that the services that we offer are vetted, that there's a way to measure the success or the failure of the campaign or whatever the service was. And there's some real nightmare stories out there, as you probably know, about people who've lost their music because they went to a less than scrupulous marketing person and their music got taken down from Spotify.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point, is about this idea of transparency, what I call white hat services. Everybody loves to talk about how they can, quote unquote, buy streams, buy plays, buy followers. And to be fair, some of the big guys still do that. I mean, they are trying to get buzz for some of their artists, but they have the clout to ensure that if something doesn't go quite right, that frankly they don't get penalized. On the other hand, the average small artist out there who tries to play some of that game will indeed be caught by the algorithms, and if they're caught by the algorithms, can in fact not only lose their access to the platform, but lose the ability to ever distribute their music again. And one of the things that Intercept uniquely provides is distribution through a major channel, through Universal Music Group and their distribution arm, which is InGrooves, and gives a level of not only legitimacy but cachet. There are a lot of middlemen that you can distribute your music through, to be sure, but the content and the detail that you garner with respect to what Intercept provides, as you pointed out a moment ago, allows you to download those reports, identify where your music's being played, and ultimately align that with your marketing efforts in the subsequent releases. And that is a very important element that many artists don't consider when looking at overall promotion of their music, right?
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, we put a dashboard out there where we try to give an artist or their label, if that's their partner or both, the ability to look over all the various aspects from one place, from what did I sell in my store today? How many streams did I get today? What marketing activities do I have today? We try to put all that in one place so that they can get a quick and a clear picture of what's going on, make some decisions, and get back to what they really want to do, which is making music.
As you've brought more and more labels on and have done some very big deals with some artists, I noticed your May results got published, and I believe you pointed out that your numbers of streams per month went up to 8.9 million streams, I think, for May, year on year, substantial increases. Is that right?
Yeah, that is true. And in fact, it was interesting. I was talking to my partner this morning. It's an interesting business because that release just came out and it's whatever it is, August 3rd or 4th or 5th or something like that. But that's the results from May that we didn't get confirmation of till July 28th.
Right.
It takes that long. So I already know what our streams are for the next couple months, but they're not confirmed yet. But it takes that long. Ingrooves gets 50 billion transactions a week.
50 billion with a B, right? And I think
50 billion with the B transactions a week of streaming transactions. Yes.
There are about 200 different platforms all around the world, aren't there? The last count I heard that are actually distributing digital music to the world. Is that right?
There are, and the three that are by far the largest are Ingrooves, Sony, and Warner in that order. Ingrooves in Universal Music is the largest by, I don't know, a couple $100 million, $300 million, something like that. But there are many out there, but they don't all distribute to the same places, and they don't all get the same rates either. And that's kind of like the little secret that not everybody knows. Let's just take Spotify, for example.
Right.
When, as an artist, you get paid for streams by country and by type of service and by service. So you get one rate from Spotify for Zimbabwe for a Spotify listener who was a paid subscriber, and you get a different rate if they were showing ads to them because they don't have a Spotify account.
Right.
So you multiply that times 230 countries and territories around the world, and that's where all of that data comes from. So in the case of Spotify, they're getting a massive amount of streams. And so because they're dealing with 12 million artists and 80 million songs that they have to report on every month, and all these new songs, 60,000 new songs a day, they have to deal with it in terms of mass numbers. So they look for things in the streaming from the artist. They look for changes, spikes, and those are the ones that they kind of have to look at along the way. So the cleaner the artist and the cleaner the music comes to them, the better the rate they pay to the distributor.
Right, exactly.
So we have really, really strict quality controls. If you submit music through Intercept, it's been programmatically checked on our end, manually checked on our end, and then programmatically checked on our end, and then programmatically and manually checked on Ingrooves' end before it's sent to Spotify or any other distributor, or any other DSP. And the DSPs know that it's clean, so less involvement from legal contests and things like that, so they pay a higher rate.
Right. So, for instance, things like making sure you have the associated writers documented if they're different than the artist, for instance, making sure that it's the quality of the WAV file, making sure, for instance, that there is no vulgarity and that it's identified in the song if there is.
Right.
Those are elements that people don't realize that need to be checked and validated. And of course, just the quality of the recording. A lot of people love to talk about how they do it in their bedroom, but the reality is it may not be radio ready, it may not be streaming ready, and so you need to have quality.
Exactly. So my point is, when you can get to somebody like that and you have the kind of relationship that we have, as long as we protect that relationship, and we do, then we give them good data and they get good rates and our artists make more money.
The other element here that you have done very well, I believe, is the whole aspect of subsequent customer service, the follow-up. And you've got the ability to go online and immediately issue a help ticket, which is tracked. All of your historical help tickets are tracked, as well as the resolution. And I've had a couple of artists where they didn't realize they made a mistake on a particular song or had given me the wrong WAV file, and we were able to quickly take that off the publication side before it got distributed and quickly replace it. And I think that kind of customer service has been helpful, because at the end of the day, people do make mistakes. And so the ability to do everything, as you said, like quality control check through Intercept, then quality control check through Ingrooves. And even after it's been finally approved, many people may not know, but the whole system here has another 48 hours where we could pull back the song before it ever actually gets physically distributed. So we have the ability, by aligning ourselves not only with Intercept, but also with Intercept's relationship with Ingrooves, to effectively manage that entire distribution process, which is effectively known. And I should add one other thing for the listeners. Unlike some of the other middlemen, one of the very powerful tools that I have in my relationship with Intercept as a label is the ability to confirm a particular date of release. And we're able to therefore plan the entirety of the social media campaign against a particular date. And there are sometimes, in many other cases, I've heard horror stories where the song gets queued into QA for a middleman, and they don't know when it's going to be released. They don't have a date certain time, and so you're waiting for that final notification. Yes, it's going to go out on this particular date. Well, being with a major label, being with a major distributor and technology company like Intercept differentiates that ability for Iron Gate and for our artists by allowing us to properly plan and execute the appropriate promotion and marketing activity that we wish to undertake.
It's nice to be able to plan that, and it's great, Mark, that this is another advantage that the labels really bring. Most artists don't realize they need to get their music prepped and out 2 or 3 weeks before it actually becomes available, so they can get the right promotion in place. And a lot of people hurry up, and then they get the last minute, want to know if they can get it out in 48 hours.
Right.
And while we might be able to do that, the question is, why would you?
You're precisely right. And I tell people at least give yourself 2 weeks to promote, preferably 3. I've had at least a couple of artists, want to hit a Mother's Day release, and maybe they were late getting their song out, and that's a different story. But having said that, more often than not, I tell people at least give yourself that 2 to 3 week period so you can properly plan and properly promote.
I was going to go back and kind of fill out the rest of the question. You brought up what we do with regards to support, and I think that's a big differentiator, because we hear a lot of complaints from DistroKid and some of the pure distro houses that, you can never get anybody on the phone. You can never get any help. We spent better part of 2 years testing this before we sort of went public with the process, or early on when we met you. And what we found is that half of the phone calls, half the questions that we were getting from artists were just to follow up to make sure we did what we were supposed to do when we were supposed to do it. And so we put this system in place, and whether you need a title changed, or you're distributing a new piece of music, or you're buying some marketing service, or you need help with social media or something else, whatever it is, everything that you do comes through getting a ticket created, just so when it's done, you as a label or one of your artists can go to their dashboard and say, hey, what's the status? And you can see the history of every ticket, the conversations that were had during the process, and whether or not it's finished or not. Well, when we did that, we cut half the calls out.
Right, exactly. Because, people don't need to talk to each other. I mean, not that you don't want to have a nice conversation, but the efficiency factor is important, both for cost point of view and providing those services. And I think one of the things I've noticed, of course, you're one individual that you have serving on the support side, Miguel, who I've known now for several years, which is a good indicator that A, Intercept's been a good place to work, and B, that he doesn't get overwhelmed because he's able to use these technologies to very quickly answer questions. And I think that is important for artists and for labels particularly.
Yeah, we're lucky to have Miguel on the team. He's got a couple. He's been nominated for 4 Grammys. He's only won 2, which I like to tease him about. But he's a pretty talented sound engineer. Yeah, he's a good guy, and he knows distribution well.
Let me ask you, I've noticed you've done a number of, I'll call them deals for the moment, strategic relationships with some major artists / groups. Tell me about that strategy and what that has sort of done. I think in areas of reggae, for instance, or in the areas of urban music are 2 that I recall.
Well, we started out with artists, and which is how we, originally met Next Door Boys. And then we moved up the labels, which is when Iron Gate came about. And because we were sort of learning, again, for me, because I'm new, learning about sort of, who the value providers are in every part of the ecosystem around, independent artists and labels. The next sort of logical step in the process, which frankly happened to us by accident, was catalogs. And we had some people that came to us after our formal public launch in mid-April. We had some people that came to us and brought us a catalog of what they told us at the time was about 7,000, which is pretty good size, reggae song catalog for some really big names. some of them as big as 25 million monthly Spotify listeners. And it was interesting. They have different requirements. Their goal basically is some of the music has been up before, some of it hasn't. They're trying to get it all up and then use our marketing services to promote it, because their goal in 3 years is to sell it. At which point they'll probably get, I don't know, somewhere between, I would guess, $5 and maybe $8 million for it. But it's all based on how much streaming it can do. So they came to us and said, "Can you help us organize this?" And we had a model that worked, right? We set up a label for them, and then underneath are 350 artists who collectively have 9,000 or 7,000 tracks. It's been an interesting evolution to get to that point. There's probably one more step that we will do over time, and that is we may go as far as to actually license the platform. One thing that I think I told you, Mark, that was coming that isn't out, if we were on a video, I would show you right now, is we now have multi-language support, because we have a really strong push down into Central and South America for Latin music.
Right.
And so we now have support for Spanish, and in a couple of weeks, we'll have support for Portuguese as well.
I know we've talked about that because, as you know, we opened the Latin America division. And the question, of course, was how do we serve that group of people in particular? Because obviously their economics are also different than North American economics, right?
Right.
So that's something I know you're beginning to address. You talk about bringing on catalogs, and obviously that's a very important point as well, because clearly the ability to have your catalog of music be developed over time and then being sold is a very strong potential. And of course, as you pointed out here, I think Universal Music Group is just one of the bigs that is already buying catalogs because they see a known streaming revenue stream as a cash contribution. So people say, why are they buying all these catalogs? Well, they're actually not necessarily going to put the songs all over movies and TV and commercials. They're actually buying a known cash flow and rolling that up into their company, right?
They're buying an annuity. That's exactly right. They take the average streaming for the last 3 years, and they multiply it by somewhere between 17 and 20, and that's roughly what the number is.
Right.
So the higher the streaming, you get 17 times that back when you're looking for a valuation. So yeah, it's a strong place, but there are opportunities that we can work with independent artists. And here's an example. So out of this catalog came one particular. There are a lot of these artists. They're still around. It's just this happens to be where some of their music is.
Right.
So a lot of these artists are big artists. So we've already got one artist on that catalog who is willing. He has 12 million monthly Spotify listeners. He is willing to create another type of marketing tool for us, and for a small fee, will share up and coming reggae artists with his fan base of 12 million.
Oh, so basically acting like an influencer.
Exactly. So now we've got the larger ones that we can create some influencing revenue for, and they can help the smaller ones in another form of marketing.
Indeed. Exactly. I think we talked a little bit about that as well, because one of the biggest challenges, and I still see it even with our artists, a couple of things are obvious with small, independents. They are always struggling for cash, right? They're struggling for cash to get their songs, recorded, produced, and out the door. And then you tell them, well, you should at least spend at least 50% of what you spent on the recording to promote it, at least. Yep. And of course, everybody kind of gets deer in the headlight because they say, well, I didn't realize that. And then when you have what I call the dreaded less than 1,000 sign on Spotify, it makes it all the worse. And I think people have to look at this in the context and say, you need to do all you can do, both from a point of view of your social media promotion to actual marketing services. And as we discussed, the opportunity to align with certain influencers over time as you grow that community to build your streaming channels so that you drive streams, not just to make money. I mean, clearly you will make some money on that, but more importantly, to create the buzz, to create the interest, and ultimately to create the opportunities for you to gig and make some real money. That's why I tell people all the time, it's important to show good streaming revenue, not to be 1 million streams. You'd love to have that, but at least get past that dreaded 1,000.
Well, it's a numbers game, right? I mean, there's three numbers that everybody wants. What's the number of social media followers? How many monthly Spotify listeners? How many streams?
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
That's the carrying card now. That's the ante to sort of play in the game. And you don't need a lot, but you need to show the right trend, right?
Exactly
And
right.
you couple it with a couple of collaborations from some well-known names where you can piggyback a little bit off of their fans, or maybe do some cover music from people that who you sound like, that type of thing. A couple of those things, and you can get there. I think a lot of artists, Mark, forget that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right?
Yes, I mean, the idea of going viral or being picked up by the major label, it does happen. The lightning does strike. But as you and I talk many times, is that with 60,000 new songs every single day, that lightning is pretty rare. And
Yeah.
so you have to look at this. There are a lot of good bands out there. There are a lot of good entertainers who are under the radar, but who are making a living at doing this. And as I tell our artists, you can always do that, but you have to be creative. You have to continue to put out content. You have to promote that content. And I think that one of the things we do and help them to effect is that set of guidelines, the guideposts, if you will, on what they should be doing to ensure that their songs are getting heard, getting played, and ultimately they're in fact promoting their own capabilities. And I've got a number of artists who are extremely hardworking.
It's a lot of work, but it's a fun business, and it's fun to work with people who, whether it's good music or not so good music, it's fun to work with people who have put their passion into their work.
Exactly. And I think, look, music, as I said in one of the other interviews I've done, is music, the ability to move an entire audience. Only music does that all the time. It's amazing how
Right.
it attempts to touch the psyche of the human soul and creates that kind of interest and that fan base and that excitement. Let's talk a little bit about the technology a bit more. Obviously you're beginning to continue, and I tell people this all the time. One of the good items about doing business with a tech company and integrating those services into what we do as Iron Gate is the ability to take advantage of many, 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 many thousands of users and other people who are using that technology. Because at that point, the tech company, in this case Intercept, is getting input from all those users and beginning to build out a roadmap for where the technology is going. And you can't do that if you're a onesie or twosie. So I tell people, why do we do what we do? Well, because at the end of the day, I can't afford to build an Intercept every single week. So you have the extraordinary benefit of integrating everything that we do through Intercept and some of the other technology partners I align with. Where is Intercept going on the platform? Where do you see some of the sort of growth opportunities and functionality, if you can talk about that? I know you're publicly traded, so you have to be careful, but is there anything you can sort of share with the audience?
Sure. I mean, basically, what I consider is right now we probably have about 90% of the base platform built right now. There's a couple little things that we don't have. Right now, we don't fully tie our marketing services all the way out to the release that they were used for. And I want to be able to give you, it's all about data at the end of the day. I want to be able to tell you, for this release on this date, you launched these marketing campaigns, you produced these streams, and you've got another release and it sounds the same. Do you want the same campaign? I want to be able to say to you, for example, in terms of data, that the smart link that artists and labels use to promote the music that has the links to all the various platforms for that song.
Mm-hmm.
I want control over that data so that you can, as an artist and a label, can leverage it. If I had that, if we were creating that right now and it wasn't coming from a third party from InGroove, which is great that we get it. It doesn't cost anything extra. It's included. But if we were creating it, then when your fans, when any one of your artist fans clicked on it, we could be gathering the data of where they're coming from and sense that, hey, they're coming from within 50 miles of where you've got a performance scheduled. So instead of just showing them the link to Spotify, also tell them, hey, we got a show coming up in Kansas City. Click here for tickets. Can't do that today. So we needed a base platform before we could layer those other things on. So we're there, I think, pretty much now. We're about to release languages. We've expanded our partnership with InGrooves through all of their Latin America offices. We'll be meeting with all of them in September. So we're opening up Spanish and Portuguese so we can address Brazil and Argentina and Peru and Colombia and Venezuela and Mexico and some of the other major markets down there. And they have referrals that they're sending to us for artists that are big, but not big enough to meet their criterion, and they want to give them a home.
Let me ask you, you talk about the data, and one of the things, of course, I always talk about is data-centric models and the ability to understand where your fans are, where that super fan is. It is interesting that we get all this play data, right? All this stream data. We get it from the country and maybe even the top cities. Is there a ways, or is the actual stream data capturing IP addresses? Do you know if there's a way to identify how the aggregation of your fans in a particular area that is in fact streaming your song or songs most often?
No, not across multiple platforms. That doesn't exist. You can get some of it from Spotify for artist account, but that's just on the Spotify side, which is only about 35 or 7% of the market.
Right.
Nothing exists where you can get it everywhere, or where you could, control it. If you think about it, for instance, if we knew that Skoda, your son's band, if we knew that Skoda was performing in Cincinnati on Friday, and we had a listener go, because first of all, we could look at the history and say there have been a lot of people that have listened to Skoda from Cincinnati. So that's a place we ought to consider booking. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now you've designed the tour, and now once you've found a place and you've booked a place in Cincinnati, now you want to tell the people in Cincinnati. So independent of running an ad campaign to tell them about it, you could also say, hey, can't the system be smart enough to say, well, anybody who comes within an IP address that's within 50 miles of Kansas City or Cincinnati, offer them a ticket.
Right.
And then after the show, if they're within 50 miles and they might have gone, offer them merchandise from the show.
Right.
You could do that if you have the data, but we don't have the data yet. So, but that's where we're going. The goal is to make this software smart.
Yeah, we used to call it, and I know you know the term, conversion marketing, right? When somebody touches your website or touches your brand, what is the economic value add of that touch point, right? How do you create more value? And today we really are limited indeed, because we get a lot of touch points, but we don't get a lot of data yet.
No. And you think about it, the data that's even the data that's coming in right now, for 1 month, for one song, you could easily get 1,000 rows of data from the different types of streaming, from the different platforms, from all the countries, from 230 countries.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's 1,000 rows of data by itself. Now you got to have a spreadsheet to even be able to look at that. So there's ways of aggregating the data together in a meaningful form, like we do on the bottom of the dashboard for a heat map for where in the country.
Right.
If you had the IP address, though, then you could go a step farther, and instead of just clicking on the US, you could drill into the cities.
Exactly right. I think that's something where it would be ideal to go. But even as you point out, if you had your pre-save link and you had people who were clicking on your pre-save link and setting up to be notified when the song is released, that data itself would at least overlay against your streaming.
Absolutely.
That could be very valuable.
Yep. I'd be able to go back and say, you can't put a name to that fan, but you can touch them.
Right.
And you can respond to them. But I can say that to this IP address, they've pre-saved this band's music 3 times, and they've listened to it X number of times. So maybe they fall into the super fan category. So
let's talk about sort of this streaming a little bit more, because one of the areas that obviously new artists need to take advantage of, and the market continues to change, as we know, but playlisting seems to be now the key strategy to get your song streamed and listened to gain new fans. It is much more difficult to sort of use Facebook, Instagram ads to convert anybody to actual listeners. At least I've noticed that in my experience. But playlisting is sort of growing. It's becoming a gargantuan business. You and I have talked a bit about that, some of the new providers out there, some of the old providers. There's the guys that buy playlists, which is not illegal, but is not allowed, but it still happens. And then there's the guys that say, we'll throw your music out there and hope for the best, see what sticks on the wall. What is your view of playlisting, and how effective is it? Can it be? Or do you see on the horizon other ways to get listeners to your music?
I think there are other ways to get listeners to your music, but playlisting is still probably the most critical component to the smaller artists in particular. About 90% of the playlists, or about 90% of the streams for smaller artists often come straight from playlists. And the advantage, and I think a lot of people don't understand how the playlists work. I mean, there's three types of playlists, Spotify, right? There's user-generated playlists. There are algorithmic playlists. Those are ones that the computer generates out of what seems to be rising above the noise of the user playlist. And then whatever rises above the noise in the algorithmic playlist, that's what gets recommended to the editorial playlist. Those are kind of the kingmakers at the top, right?
Right.
So the end user playlists play a critical role in creating exposure like that. You know, you can, for a reasonably small investment, get your music put up on anywhere between 10 and maybe 30 playlists in the course of a month. And some of those playlists may have as many as 200,000 or 300,000 followers.
Indeed.
So it's a great way to get exposure, especially early on.
A lot of questions I also get is, how do they get on radio and college radio? What's your thoughts there, and where are the services going relative to those two channels?
Well, we do have, there's obviously several types of radio. There's Sirius XM and Music Choice, which is the streaming music in Comcast and Viacom. It's about 65 million households. That's kind of non-traditional distribution, and they have their own curation departments, but you get paid as though it were a radio station. And then there is terrestrial radio, which we have in process. In fact, I think the first terrestrial radio package for pop artists is going up on the services site the next week.
Good.
And then there are smaller services that are more digital radio services, and there are college radio stations, college radio in particular, and we have a list of about 800 of them that we're going to start reaching out to for our artists. College radio stations is oftentimes a great place for music to break. It's where it first gets discovered.
Yeah, especially the demographic of colleges. I mean, you've got that 18 to 25-year-old typically, and those are people that are more mature in their listening habits, perhaps.
Sometimes we've seen great results by a combination of playlists and college radio in terms of kind of creating a 1-2 punch that's addressing the same demographic within the geographical region.
Right, exactly. Certainly that would be a great service that I know we've talked about getting offered here soon, and I know a number of my artists have asked about that. As it relates to sort of the business in general, what are some of the macro trends you're starting to see now as it relates to not only the technology, but just the music business? What's changing? Has it been somewhat static? What are you hearing from your channels and with the big guys that you talk to?
That's a good, interesting question. Well, TikTok's clearly on the rise. There's no question about that. It's probably the biggest single influencer right now. Not sure what's going to happen. There's talk that TikTok may offer their own streaming service. I'd be a little wary of that, because having dug as deeply into the distribution business as I have, it's messy, and you really got to know what you're doing there. So they may offer distribution, but I don't think it will be anywhere near the breadth of what any of the big three offer. I see a lot of trends towards video. The X generation, the millennials, they want to see video first. I think you're going to see a resurgence of some of that. We have a group that we're working with out of Mexico. Well, they're actually out of the United States, but they put on a contest called the Music Marvels Contest. And,
I've seen that. Right.
Yeah. So last year they had about 2,500 entrants from 153 countries, and the winner got a major label contract and some cash and some other stuff. And they have a new program that we're launching with them in Latin America called Open Mic. And it's a concept where the artists are submitting 8 to 10 minute videos on not just their music, but the rest of their life. She's going to consolidate those into a channel. And again, the winner, after has some celebrity judges, but the winner gets a label, and that's going to be announced at the September Grammys. And so I think you're going to see more sort of out of the box kind of creative solutions. I heard another idea the other day, which I thought was really clever, as a clever way to engage a fan base, where an artist had a contest, which is contest by themselves are pretty common, but the contest was to submit your version, your best version of one of the verses of their song, and they'll do a re-release and participate with you on that one verse.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
So that's a pretty clever way to engage an audience, especially the portion of them, that has any kind of musical skills is, hey, you could sing with me on a verse of my next song, for example.
Oh, in a collaboration, basically, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think you're going to see a lot more collaborations too. A lot of, not just in terms of like an influencer, let's say, but a lot of where you've got a major artist working with a younger artist. And it's a way for a major artist to get more music out, and a way for a younger artist to piggyback off the major artist fan base, especially if they can get a couple of posts on social media. So I think you'll see more of that.
Are you seeing a move toward, obviously on a genre basis, hip hop and rap has taken sort of the first place, but I sense there's a little bit of fatigue there because of, I can only describe it sometimes, monotonous sound. Are you seeing any changes in sort of demand on different genres at this point in time?
No, that's a good question, Mark. Not really, but I mean, the difference is Skoda is a rock band, right? Well,
Right.
so you got to write the music, you got to perform the music, you got multiple players, you need a studio, you need an engineer, you need all that stuff, right?
Correct.
To make rap music, I need a beat and a microphone and Pro Tools on my laptop.
Yes, exactly. And
So the amount of music that's coming out from that genre is huge, but the amount of energy that goes into make each individual track in that genre is nowhere near what it would be in rock or in country or anything like that.
Yeah, I love Rick Beato. He's an Atlanta producer. I watch his videos all the time. He's really fun to watch. But he comments this year's top, I think there's 10 songs for Grammy Awards. And he was listening to several of the rap type songs, and he said, "I thought we got rid of the cicada hi-hats," and I have to agree. It's kind of funny because exactly that. I mean, I tell my son all the time, if I listen to that one more time, I'm going to scream because it's just fake. And I think some of this stuff has become monotonous. And to your point is it's very easy to produce. It's consumable and disposable, frankly.
Yeah, and it's volume. It's just mass
Yeah.
volume,
Yeah.
and they'll reuse the beats and stuff like that, or they tweak it just a little bit. And I'm not saying it's all music and it's all different. That's all.
That's right. Exactly.
It isn't necessarily, and there isn't any music that I personally really dislike, but it probably wouldn't be my go-to first choice either.
Right, and I think I enjoy R&B and blues. That's cool because there's a melodic component and
Right.
there's also musicianship. For me, that's interesting. I just like a broader array of musicianship in the music that I listen to, and I think for me that's why I tend also towards rock and even some of the rock pop. Although some of the current pop also tends to get overproduced. Both in terms of auto tuning and other effects. But having said that, you're absolutely right. I watch how my own son's band and others that I'm working with create their music, create their songs, write the lyrics, do the melodies, plan the dynamics of the song, and then ultimately go into the studio and play all the pieces, put it together, and then ultimately release it. And it is a hell of a lot of work. And
you got to do it again in 90 days.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So as we close here on time, any other thoughts you have about the business? Now that you're a tech mogul in the music business, are you seeing any trends there?
Seeing a blank wall, Mark. No, it's a great business. It's other people are catching on. You're starting to see other distributors. From a technology standpoint, look, I've done this many times. The best lead that you got is 18 months. Somebody with more money can come along and say, "Hey, I figured out they got a good idea. I can use what they did and make a blueprint and try to make it better."
Right.
So we have to stay ahead of the game. We've got 12 marketing services now. There's 25 or 26 more in the queue. Lyric videos. Obviously, and then, as you mentioned, number of radio stations. We may even have our own radio station that we can use to help artists with.
Hey, you can put some of the artists on my station.
There you go. Well, we should talk more about that.
I've had a lot of fun. That's one of the things I've done, as you probably know. I mean, I launched an independent radio station. It's internet-based for all of my artists. I've actually already had the voice imaging done. You should listen to it sometime. And I put the podcast that we record here on their station as well as produce them and distribute them separately. So we're we're distributed on all the major podcast tools. And in fact, the pickup is actually quite interesting already on the first release that we did August 1st, which was quite good by standards for long sound formats of this nature. And one of the things I did at Iron Gate is, besides the services and leveraging everything you do, adding other services, but also, as I said, taking all of our artists' music and putting it into a play format. We're building it constantly. We're going to be building radio shows. In fact, I'm launching a new show on radio called Rising Star. One of my first groups is going to be interviewed for that, which will be a podcast type of interview, but no more than 30 minutes. And they'll be able to play their music and do some of the discussion around that as well. So it'll be a live to tape. And we're going to continue. Fabulous. We're going to be continuing to do that. And radio is as opposed to getting lost on a playlist of 300 songs or getting lost on a radio that only plays your song once or twice a week. It's constantly played around the clock, and all of your songs get repeated over time. And then, we've even done things like had our artists be able to do intros about this is Iron Gate Records Radio, that sort of thing. So it's a lot of fun, and, it's trying to just build channels. And I think that's the critical element here for artists. You have to build channels for your music to get it out. And because today it really is about micro marketing, it's sort of the tail of the dog. You've got to figure those things out, and True. It is not just one way only. And ultimately, people ask the question as an independent label, well, Mark, where do you go from here? Well, I tell them, I said, frankly, I'd love one of my artists to hit it big. I'd love Columbia or Warner or Universal to come to me and say, you know what, we'd like to cooperate with you, and let's push this artist into our channel, and would be worth all the work we're doing as an independent label today. This was Tod Turner from Intercept Music. Thanks so very much for your time today, and we'll see you next week on The Independent Musician with Mark Skoda. Thanks very much.
Thanks for joining us this week on The Independent Musician. Make sure to visit our website, IronGateRecordsRadio.com, where you can subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming platform, so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this podcast, we'd appreciate you giving us feedback or simply tell a friend about the show. Be sure to tune in next week for a new episode of The Independent Musician, where the independent musician is the star.